Have you ever found yourself looking at the world around you and feeling that something just doesn't fit? As if everyone is following an invisible script, chasing goals that seem important but somehow sound like a massive collective play? It's that unsettling feeling that arises when you stop for a moment in the middle of everyday busyness and ask yourself, why are we all doing this? Why do we wake up every day, fulfill our obligations, seek success and recognition, consume endlessly as if our lives depended on it? And perhaps the most disturbing question, does it really matter? This feeling is not a flaw in you. It's not a personality defect or an inability to adapt to society. On the contrary, it's a glimpse of a fundamental truth about our contemporary condition that few are willing to face directly. For thousands of years, we humans lived immersed in grand narratives that gave meaning to our existence, whether through ancient mythologies, organized religions, or more recently, political and economic ideologies. We always had collective stories that offered us purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging. These narratives told us who we were, where we came from, and where we were supposed to go. They answered the great existential questions every human being inevitably faces. What is the purpose of my existence? What happens after death? How should I live a good life? What is good and evil? The ancient Egyptians lived by the belief that life was a preparation for eternity and that their actions would be judged after death. The Greeks believed in a cosmos ordered by gods who directly intervened in human affairs. Medieval Europe was dominated by the Christian vision of a world created by God, where each individual should seek eternal salvation. In the 20th century, great ideologies such as communism and capitalism offered comprehensive visions of how society should be organized and what the role of the individual should be within it. I'm not here to judge whether these narratives were true or false. The crucial point is that they worked. They provided a framework of meaning that allowed individuals to orient their lives and find purpose in their daily actions. They connected generations within a common and coherent project. A medieval peasant might have been extremely poor by today's material standards, but he lived in a universe full of meaning. Every action, no matter how mundane, was part of a larger story that gave it purpose. But something extraordinary happened over the last 2 centuries, and more dramatically in recent decades. These great narratives began to crumble, one after another. Modern science, with its unprecedented explanatory power, corroded the foundations of traditional religious worldviews. The traumatic experiences of the 20th century world wars, holocausts, and totalitarian regimes deeply shook faith in progress and in the secular ideologies that promised a utopian future. What emerged from this process was not a new grand narrative, but rather a vacuum of meaning. An empty space quickly filled not by a coherent new story about who we are and where we are headed as a species, but by something much simpler and ultimately unsatisfying: consumerism and the relentless pursuit of immediate individual satisfaction. Here we reach the inconvenient truth that conscious people begin to perceive, but most prefer to ignore. We are living in an age of meaning collapse. A time when the old narratives that sustain the collective sense of purpose have fragmented and no new coherent vision has emerged to replace them. Instead, we fill this void with elaborate distractions, with the accumulation of experiences and possessions, with a frantic chase for stimuli that keep us entertained enough not to face the underlying existential emptiness. Look around you. What does our contemporary culture offer as an answer to the great existential questions? Live in the moment, be yourself, follow your dreams, enjoy life to the fullest. There are vague, individualistic mantras that ultimately answer nothing substantial. They tell us nothing about our place in the cosmos, about our relationship with others, about what constitutes a well-lived life beyond the satisfaction of momentary desires. What we have instead is a culture obsessed with infinite economic growth, with ever-accelerating technological progress, with the accumulation of material goods and experiences we can display on social media. All of this without any deep reflection about where we are actually going or why. The real epiphany, the truth that few are willing to confront, is that most of us are living in a state of veiled existential confusion. We run faster and faster without knowing where we are going. We produce and consume on an unprecedented scale without questioning whether it truly brings lasting fulfillment. We lose ourselves in digital worlds and escapist fantasies because reality, stripped of transcendent meaning, has become unbearably dry. Maybe you felt it. That moment when you achieve a goal you worked years for, only to realize the satisfaction lasts just a few days before the emptiness returns. Or when you acquire the item you so deeply desired, only for your interest in it to fade almost immediately. Or when you scroll through your social media feed for hours, only to feel more empty and disconnected than before. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are symptoms of a broader cultural illness, a crisis of meaning that affects not just isolated individuals, but our entire civilization. The most insidious aspect of this crisis is that it comes disguised as abundance. Never in human history have we had so many entertainment options, so many consumption possibilities, so many ways to communicate. It's easy to confuse this material and informational abundance with existential wealth. It's easy to think that because we can choose between thousands of products, shows, and careers, we are somehow freer or more fulfilled than our ancestors. But the truth is that this abundance of options often masks a poverty of purpose. The freedom to choose among countless distractions is not the same as the freedom to build a meaningful life. Technology has amplified this dynamic to unprecedented levels. Our smartphones and computers connect us to an endless stream of information, entertainment, and social stimuli. They are meticulously designed to capture and hold our attention. Every notification, every infinite scroll of content, every like received releases small doses of dopamine that keep us engaged. We have developed an almost addictive relationship with our devices precisely because they temporarily fill that void of meaning. Let's be honest. How many hours a day do you spend consuming digital content without any clear purpose? Scrolling aimlessly, jumping from video to video, from post to post, in an endless search for what exactly, if you stop to reflect, you'll realize that much of this behavior isn't really driven by genuine interest in the content itself, but by a desire to escape the discomfort of emptiness, the lack of purpose, the feeling that we should be doing something more meaningful with our time, but don't know exactly what. This is the great irony of our age. We are simultaneously more connected and more isolated than ever. We have access to more information than any previous generation, but less and less wisdom. We have more entertainment options, but less genuine joy. We have more means of communication, but shallower conversations. We have more friends online, but more superficial relationships. And all this because we're trying to fill with distractions and superficial connections a void that actually demands something much deeper, authentic meaning. And here lies the central paradox. The more we try to fill that void with external stimuli and distractions, the more that void seems to grow. It's like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. Every attempt to find lasting satisfaction through consumption, social status, passive entertainment, or even conventional professional success only intensifies the sense that something essential is missing. This situation is not accidental. It's the predictable result of an economic and social system that fundamentally depends on our perpetual discontent. Contemporary capitalism thrives by creating and then exploiting a constant sense of inadequacy and desire. Modern advertising doesn't just sell products, it sells identities, lifestyles, the promise that the next purchase, the next experience, the next upgrade will finally bring the satisfaction we seek, but that promise is structurally impossible to fulfill. Because if we ever truly found lasting satisfaction, if we ever said, I have enough, the entire system would collapse. The infinite economic growth that sustains our societal model requires that we are never fully content, that we always want more, that we are perpetually chasing the next thing that's supposed to fill the void. The result is a society of permanently dissatisfied individuals running faster and faster on a treadmill that leads nowhere, chasing a fulfillment that is structurally designed to remain forever out of reach. And here we reach a crucial point. This system not only fails to meet our deepest existential needs, but is also endangering the very habitability of the planet. The pursuit of infinite economic growth on a finite planet is a mathematical impossibility. The Earth's ecological limits are becoming painfully evident through climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion. We are therefore facing a double crisis, a crisis of meaning on an individual and cultural level, and an ecological crisis on a planetary level. And the most remarkable thing is that both have the same root: our collective inability to articulate a purpose, a sense of direction that goes beyond material accumulation and perpetual economic growth. The truth that conscious people are beginning to see is that we cannot continue on this path, that this model of civilization, based on infinite growth and consumption as a substitute for meaning, not only leaves us existentially empty, but is actively destroying the ecological foundations that sustain our survival as a species. What makes this truth so difficult to accept is that it demands a radical rethinking of virtually every aspect of how we organize our society and our individual lives. We are not talking about small adjustments or incremental reforms. We are talking about a fundamental transformation in our relationship with consumption, technology, work, success, and ultimately with meaning itself. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, which aspect of this reality we're discussing most awakens your fear or apprehension? That feeling that perhaps everything you've been chasing isn't truly what you need? I know that often we keep these concerns to ourselves, perhaps afraid of seeming out of place in a world that celebrates the relentless pursuit of material success and status. But your worries are valid and probably shared by more people than you realize. Share in the comments. My greatest fear about the existential emptiness of modern life is your voice can help create a space where we can honestly discuss these collective fears instead of suppressing them. And perhaps by naming these fears together, we can begin to imagine ways to face them. The truth is, on some level, we all know that something is deeply wrong. Even those who appear most fully integrated into the current system, who display all the outward markers of success, often experience what we might call moments of existential clarity. Moments when the curtain drops and they see, even briefly, the emptiness underlying everything they've been pursuing. It's that late night moment when the successful executive wonders whether his life truly has any higher purpose, or when the celebrity adored by millions looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the person staring back. These moments are usually brief and frightening. Most people quickly repress them and return to the comfort of distractions and conventional narratives. But they are also precious opportunities, windows into a deeper truth, chances to awaken to a more authentic form of existence. What would happen if, instead of fleeing from these moments, we began to inhabit them consciously? If we allowed existential discomfort to teach us something about what truly matters? If we used the feeling of emptiness not as something to be filled with more distractions, but as a call toward a deeper search? Historically, moments of collective existential crisis have often preceded great cultural and spiritual transformations. It was amid the collapse of the certainties of the ancient world that the great world religions emerged. It was in the social and intellectual turbulence of the late Middle Ages that the Renaissance and later the Enlightenment arose. Perhaps we are living through a similar moment, a gap between worlds, where the old narratives no longer work, but the new ones have not yet fully crystallized. There are signs that something new is emerging. Across the world, people are experimenting with ways of life that challenge the dominant logic of consumerism and infinite growth. Intentional communities, voluntary simplicity movements, returns to nature, rediscoveries of traditional spiritual practices, new forms of economic organization based on cooperation rather than competition. These experiences are still marginal, true, but they point to possibilities of social organization and meaning that go beyond the current paradigm. At the same time, we are witnessing a renewed interest in wisdom traditions long marginalized by Western modernity. Contemplative practices such as meditation and mindfulness, once considered exotic, are now adopted even at the heart of corporate capitalism, albeit often in diluted and instrumentalized forms. We also see a growing interest in altered states of consciousness, whether through the rediscovery of psychedelic substances or through techniques such as holotropic breathwork or deep meditation. These states often provide direct experiences of connection and transcendent meaning that challenge the dominant materialistic and individualistic worldview. All of this suggests that even amid the apparent triumph of consumer materialism, something deeper is stirring within the collective consciousness a renewed search for meaning, for connection, for a form of existence that recognizes our deepest human needs. However, it would be naive to underestimate the obstacles to genuine transformation. The current system is not merely a set of economic or technological arrangements. It is a complex interweaving of power structures, incentives, identities, and narratives that fiercely resist change. Consider for a moment the enormous interests invested in maintaining the status quo. Giant corporations whose business models fundamentally depend on our continuous and ever-growing consumption, political systems, captured by those same economic interests, educational institutions that primarily prepare people to be productive workers and loyal consumers, not reflective citizens or whole human beings. More subtly, but just as powerfully, our very identities and sense of personal worth are intertwined with the current system. From childhood, we are socialized to define our value in terms of productivity, achievement, social status, and purchasing power. Challenging this system is not just a matter of changing external policies or institutions. It means confronting deeply ingrained aspects of how we define ourselves. And then there is the problem of complexity. We live in a global civilization of unprecedented scale and interdependence in human history. The problems we face, from the climate crisis to rising inequality, are overwhelmingly complex. There is no simple solution, no silver bullet, no single path toward a wiser and more sustainable society. Faced with such complexity, it is easy to fall into a kind of paralysis, to feel that the problems are so vast, the forces at play so powerful, that any individual action is meaningless. Or, equally dangerously, to fall for simplistic solutions that promise to fix everything but merely replace one totalizing ideology with another. The path forward, therefore, is not one grand unified solution, but a multiplicity of experiments, attempts, pilot projects, a diversity of approaches that together can begin to build the foundations of a wiser, fairer, and more sustainable civilization. For that, we must cultivate a quality particularly rare in our current world: epistemic humility, the ability to say, "I don't know," and truly mean it, to recognize the limits of our knowledge and understanding, to remain open to divergent perspectives and new evidence, to resist the temptation of premature certainties and overly simplified answers. We also need to develop the capacity to think across multiple scales simultaneously, to connect our individual daily choices and actions to the larger systems and structures shaping our world, to see how the personal and political, the individual and collective, the local and global are inextricably interwoven, and perhaps most importantly, we need to cultivate a sense of possibility and hope that does not depend on guarantees of success, a willingness to act even in the face of uncertainty, to experiment knowing that many attempts will fail, to plant seeds without knowing for sure whether we will see them bear fruit. It's easy, in the face of the magnitude of the challenges we face, to fall into paralyzing cynicism or into false hope based on miraculous technological solutions. The harder but truer path is to cultivate what philosopher Václav Havel called deep hope, not the expectation that everything will turn out well, but a commitment to the meaning and value of doing what is right regardless of the outcome. Because the truth is, we have no guarantees. We don't know whether we will succeed in transforming our civilization in time to avoid catastrophic consequences from the ecological and social crises already underway. We don't know whether new forms of collective meaning and purpose will emerge to replace the exhausted narratives of the past. We don't know whether today's marginal experiences and movements will become tomorrow's dominant structures. But we do know that the current path is unsustainable. We know that a system based on infinite growth on a finite planet is mathematically doomed. We know that a culture that replaces authentic meaning with consumption and distraction is producing an epidemic of psychological suffering, from anxiety and depression to addiction and suicide. And we also know that human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for change and adaptation. Throughout our history as a species, we have undergone countless cultural, technological, and social transformations. We have overcome challenges that once seemed insurmountable. We have reinvented our societies and ourselves again and again. Perhaps the most important thing to recognize is that this transformation is already happening. It's not something we must start from scratch. It is emerging now in countless places and in countless forms, often at the margins, far from the spotlight of mainstream media and the halls of power. It's happening in communities, rediscovering simpler, more nature-connected ways of living, in social entrepreneurs, creating business models based on regeneration rather than extraction, in educators reimagining schools as spaces for integral human development, not merely training grounds for the labor market, in artists crafting new narratives and visions of what could be possible. And it's happening in the hearts and minds of ordinary people who, like you, are beginning to question the fundamental assumptions of how we live, who are finding the courage to ask whether there's more to life than the endless pursuit of more, who are seeking ways to live with greater integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. This awakening is not a single event, but an ongoing process. It doesn't happen all at once, but in layers with regressions and breakthroughs. There are days when the illusion falls away completely, and we see with crystal clarity the hollow nature of the game we've been playing. And there are days when we are drawn back into old patterns, old conditioning, old stories. The important thing is not to judge ourselves for these fluctuations, not to expect perfection or instant transformation, to be gentle with ourselves and with one another as we navigate this challenging and unfamiliar territory, because the truth is, we are doing something extraordinarily difficult. We are trying to evolve consciously as a species. We are attempting to transform not just our technologies or institutions, but our very consciousness, our way of being in the world. Historically, such transformations have typically unfolded over long periods, driven by forces people barely understood. We are trying to do something different, to intentionally guide our own cultural and psychological evolution, aware of the challenges and possibilities involved. There are no detailed maps for this territory, no experts who can tell us exactly how to proceed. We are all, in a sense, learning as we go, improvising, experimenting, discovering together. And perhaps that is precisely what makes this moment so extraordinary, so full of possibilities. We are participating in one of the greatest adventures possible, the conscious reinvention of what it means to be human, of how to live together on this planet, of how to create meaning and purpose in a world where old certainties have dissolved. This is not an easy journey. It demands courage to confront uncomfortable truths, humility to recognize how much we do not know, patience to persist even when progress is slow or imperceptible, compassion for ourselves and others as we stumble, fail, and learn. But it is also a profoundly rewarding journey. There is a particular joy in awakening from illusion, in seeing through the games and distractions that once consumed so much of our attention and energy. There is a sense of spaciousness and freedom that arises when we stop trying to fill the void with more possessions, more achievements, more stimulation, and there is a deep satisfaction in beginning to live in greater alignment with more authentic and meaningful values. The truth is, we cannot predict exactly what the emerging world will look like. We cannot know for sure which new forms of social organization, which new economic systems, which new narratives of meaning will eventually replace the current ones. The future is being created now through the choices and actions of countless people, and its final shape is inherently unpredictable. But we can consciously participate in this creative process. We can contribute our own ideas, experiments, and visions. We can join others who are walking similar paths. We can be both witnesses and co-creators of this great transformation. And perhaps, in the end, this is the deepest truth that conscious people are beginning to perceive, that we are active participants in the evolution of our culture and collective consciousness, that our choices, actions, and ways of being in the world matter not only for our individual lives, but for the unfolding of human history itself. This is an enormous responsibility, of course. It is much easier to see oneself as a small piece in a system, too large to be influenced, to go with the flow, to accept the world as it is. But it is also an extraordinary opportunity, a chance to consciously take part in something far greater than ourselves, to contribute, even modestly, to the birth of a wiser, fairer, and more sustainable world. Perhaps you are wondering where to begin, how to take part in this great process of transformation. The answer is both simple and challenging. Start where you are, with your own life, your own community, your own unique gifts and abilities. Begin by questioning the assumptions you have internalized about what constitutes a well-lived life. about what truly brings lasting fulfillment, about how you define success, purpose, meaning. Begin experimenting with ways of living that depend less on material consumption and more on meaningful connections, that prioritize being over having, that create space for contemplation and presence in a world dominated by distraction and haste. Begin building or joining communities of shared practice and purpose, people with whom you can explore new paths, support one another, create together. Remember that cultural transformation is a deeply social process, not something we can accomplish alone. Begin using your specific talents and skills to contribute in your own unique way to the emergence of a better world. Whether you are an artist or an engineer, a teacher or an entrepreneur, a parent or a community activist, there are infinite ways to take part in this great transition. And perhaps most importantly, begin practicing patience and perseverance. This transformation will not happen overnight. There will be obstacles, setbacks, moments of despair. What matters is to keep going, one day at a time, one step at a time, trusting the process even when results are not immediately visible. If these reflections have touched something you have been feeling but perhaps could not put into words, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your questions and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us in this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. In the end, the truth the world may not yet be ready to hear, but that conscious people are increasingly recognizing, is this: we are at a turning point in human history. The old systems, structures, and narratives are wearing out while new ones are being born. The future is not predetermined, but will be shaped by the choices we make now, individually and collectively. We can continue down the current path of meaningless consumption and unsustainable growth, even as it leaves us existentially empty and destroys the life support systems of our planet. Or we can choose a different path, one of greater awareness, wisdom, and connection. A path that honors our deepest human needs and the ecological limits of our planetary home. This choice stands before us now, not as a single grand decision, but as thousands of small choices we make every day in how we live, work, consume, and relate, in how we devote our time, attention, and energy, in the stories we tell ourselves and each other about who we are and what matters. There are no guarantees that we will choose wisely, of course. The challenges are immense. The forces maintaining the status quo are powerful, and time may be running out to avoid the catastrophic consequences of our collective past actions. But the very awareness of this choice, the recognition that we are at a turning point, is already a significant step. It is an awakening from the collective hypnosis that kept us blindly following a path we know, in our clearest moments, cannot continue. And perhaps, after all, this is the deeper purpose of the existential emptiness so many of us experience. It is not merely a symptom of something wrong, but a calling toward something truer. Not merely a sign of crisis, but a doorway to transformation, the emptiness we feel when distractions fall away, when the noise stops, when we come face to face with the great unanswered existential questions, is also a space of possibility, a fertile ground where new forms of meaning, purpose, and connection can begin to take root. Perhaps this is the ultimate invitation, not to flee from that emptiness, but to inhabit it consciously, not to rush to fill it with more noise, more activity, more consumption, but to allow it to teach us, transform us, open us to possibilities we could never imagine while we were too busy running on the treadmill of conventional success and perpetual distraction. This is the truth that conscious people are beginning to see, that the collapse of old narratives, though frightening and disorienting, is also an unprecedented opportunity, a chance to consciously take part in the birth of a new era in human history. An era not of endless material growth, but of spiritual and ecological maturity. An era not of conquest and domination, but of partnership and regeneration. An era not of distraction and escapism, but of presence and authentic connection. This vision may seem utopian, and in a sense it is not, in the sense of being impossible, but in the sense that it does not yet fully exist. It is emerging, being born through the actions and choices of countless people who, like you, are awakening to a deeper understanding of our situation and our possibilities. The invitation is for you to join this great creative process, not as a follower of some prepackaged plan or ideology, but as a co-creator, bringing your own unique gifts, insights, and visions. Because in the end, the answer to the crisis of meaning we face will not come from outside. It will not be found in some sacred book, philosophical system, or political program. It will emerge from the collective intelligence of a humanity awakening to its real situation and authentic possibilities. And perhaps one day we will look back at this moment of apparent collapse and confusion and recognize it for what it truly is, not an ending, but a new beginning, not a fall, but a metamorphosis, the moment when we as a species began to become truly conscious of ourselves and of our place on this living planet that is our only home. This is the truth that conscious people are beginning to see. And though the world may not yet be ready to fully hear it, every person who awakens to it, who begins to live in alignment with it, who shares it with others in authentic and compassionate ways, contributes to its eventual manifestation. Are you ready to take part in this great adventure? To be not just a witness, but an active participant in this extraordinary transformation? The choice, as always, is yours, and whatever that choice may be, it matters more than you can imagine.
When I write a book, I would sometimes try to imagine my reader. And I usually base my imagined reader either on myself or on people I actually know, or on encounters I had with students at university or public events or interviews. But this is a very limited pool of examples, of data. When I'm doing it, maybe I have a kind of pool of information on a couple of hundred people. The AI that would write the book or the piece of music, it would have data on millions and billions of human beings over time. If the goal is to create a certain state of mind for other people, I just don't see how we can compete with the AI on that, especially as it will also have the advantage of being able to tailor the book, the song specifically to different people.
Humans are the most intelligent animals on the planet. They are also the most delusional entities on the planet. A super intelligence is likely to be super delusional as well. Nothing in human history indicates that intelligence is a good antidote to delusion or necessarily puts you on a path towards the truth. I think that the impulse towards truth comes really from consciousness. And since there is no evidence that AI has consciousness, and maybe it will develop, maybe as we speak, the first conscious AI is being kind of born somewhere. But so far we have no convincing evidence that it is conscious, that it's capable of suffering. One of, I think, the big delusions of places like Silicon Valley is this overemphasis on intelligence, which is partly because there are extremely intelligent people there, who their life is built on intelligence, and they tend to overvalue intelligence. And this is a very dangerous thing. My kind of historical instinct is that a super intelligent AI, if it lacks consciousness, it will not pursue the truth. It will very quickly start to pursue other things, which will be shaped by delusions of various types.
I think about climate change. One of the things that people should realize is what is the cost of preventing catastrophic climate change? What size of a check do you need to write if you want to solve this? How much money? And nobody knows for sure, but the best estimates we have, something like 2%, 3%, maybe 5% of global GDP. Now, this is a lot, but it's completely doable. If I told you it's 50%, then forget it. We are not going to do it. It's not like if you're a dinosaur 65 million years ago, when the asteroid comes, then don't bother. I mean, there is nothing you can do about it. But we are not like the dinosaurs. To shift even 5% of our resources from one field to another, this is what politicians do all the time.